In November 2014, the Maternal and Child Health Bureau Division of Healthy Start and Perinatal Services hosted the 2014 Healthy Start Convention, a new era of Healthy Start, emphasizing quality and planning for success. This is a recording of the Partnering for Collective Impact plenary featuring Sylvia Choi from Tamarack Ann Institute for Community Engagement and Larita Kegler-Krall from Boston Public Health Commission.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks. I feel the pressure, that 30-minute pressure. Are you ready? So I'm going to go quickly, and then by all means catch me. If you have other questions, I'm happy to go deeper on things as we need to. Just a quick question for me, collective impact. How many of you have I'm trying to get a gauge on how deep to go, what do you know? So how many of you have read the articles by Kania and Kramer? How many of you would say that you're kind of actively implementing a collective impact initiative right now? Hey, all right. Okay, so in 30 minutes, let's walk us through this. Let's see, so just a quick briefing. I work with an organization called the Tamarack Institute for Community Engagement. It's a charity. We have online learning resources. So another place you can go to deepen your own learning and find things you need. Specifically, we have 3. The Leading Collaboratively, or tamarackcci.ca, is for people like yourself that are implementing collective impact and collaborative initiatives, looking for resources and tools. Our Vibrant Communities learning community uses multi-sector collaborative approaches, but is really, really focused on poverty reduction efforts. So that's the focus. And the Deepening Community Learning Community is really looking at what is the role, the unique role of the citizen and the community in making powerful social change happen. So what do I want to do in 30 minutes? I really want to just give you a little bit of a deeper dive into collective impact, but before going there, I think I want to set the context with you a little around 2 particular things. One of the big questions often I hear is, so what's the difference between collective impact and collaboration? Because we've been collaborating anyway, so we're going to go into that a bit. And there's another important piece I want to use as a bit of a context setter for collective impact, which is understanding the nature of working on complex issues. So, collective impact. You know, when Dr. Liu was up talking, he talked a lot about needle change, needle change. What that is a very substantive and measurable impact on a desired issue or change. Now, a colleague of mine likes to sort of say to us, this notion of collective impact has really been around for longer than we think, right? That there have been, for quite some time, a number of different groups all around the country and around the world who've been experimenting with working together across sectors on tough, complex social or environmental issues, which is really the definition of collective impact. He called that Collective Impact 1.0. And then in the winter of 2011, when the folks at FSG published that amazing article in the Stanford Social Innovation Review, what they did was they gave all of us who'd been stumbling alone in the dark trying to figure out how to tackle these complex issues in different ways, an aha and a revelation and a common language to use in explaining how we are working and how this work is different. That was Collective Impact 2.0. Since then, last year, did you know that in philanthropy circles, collective impact was the most Googled and searched word? It has absolutely gone viral. And the thought is that those of us who've been out there on the front line working on complex community issues know that the way we've been doing things has had some impact, but not enough. And that we have to get better at finding new ways. And collective impact has given us this framework to help us think about how we do our work and do it differently. However, so 2.0, the gift of Kramer and John Kania, is that they gave us a common language and a framework to think about this work. And then finally, here we are today. The reality is there are people experimenting with working with collective impact now all across. We just hosted a learning event. We had representatives from 8 different countries who are actively working on collective impact approaches. And so what that means, just as you folks are embarking in Healthy Start, on adopting the collective impact framework is there will be a ton more rich learning that happens around how to make this happen. So this is very much a living practice, and I think that's what I really want to emphasize with you. People are taking this framework and working with it and adapting and enriching each other's learning as we go. When I learned more about your work specifically, oops, I'm going the wrong way, sorry folks. What really impressed me was, wow, how lucky to be able to be working on issues around women and children's health, because that really positions you in a unique way to play a catalyzing role in enhancing the well-being of communities across the nation. That's amazing. So let's talk about a little bit first, before we dive deeper into the different elements of collective impact, which you've heard, to anchor this a little bit around answering that question, how is collective impact different from other forms of collaboration? So this is a spectrum of different forms of collaboration. You'll see on the one end, we've got competing. And the reality is, for many of us, competition between and amongst different services and different agencies is a reality. Then there's coexisting. We know that there's these other initiatives, but we're all kind of going like this, and we've got our blinders on, and away we go. Sometimes there's communicating, where we actually exchange information with each other. Then we move along that spectrum to cooperating, coordinating, collaborating, integrating. You'll see at the bottom, as you move along that continuum, there's an assumption that our understanding of turf begins to decline, but at the same time, to move along that continuum effectively, there needs to be growing trust amongst the different players. Collective impact is nested more on the far end of the continuum of collaboration, around cooperation, coordination, collaboration, integration. The distinction, I will say, of collective impact relative to other forms of collaboration really stands out for me in two ways. Firstly, it is very intentional about working across sectors. So it's assuming that some of these issues that we need to tackle, different sectors are holding a piece of, and it's only when we work together that we're going to really be able to make the kind of change we want to see. And secondly, one of the defining characteristics of collective impact relative to other forms of collaboration is the absolute rigor upon shared measurement. So the group as a whole is defining what are the measures we want to use to let us know we really are making that difference we're looking for, and then tracking it over time. So the second grounding piece I want to offer you is, so collective impact is flavor of the month. It is being talked about a lot. Does that mean collective impact is the answer for everything? No, it doesn't. So collective impact, in the experience that Tamarack has had, certainly, advancing multi-sector roundtables on poverty reduction across Canada and other complex issues, is recognized to be particularly effective when you're dealing with a complex issue. So how do you tell a complex issue from a non-complex issue? What other kinds of issues are there? Brenda Zimmerman, who is a co-author of this amazing book called Getting to Maybe, How the World Has Changed, did a really great job of saying, you know what, really? We have three different kinds of problems. The first is a simple problem. And she says a definition of a simple problem is making soup or making a cake, okay? So I have a recipe, I give it to you. You take the ingredients, I take the ingredients. The ingredients are pretty standard, they're static, they don't change. So if I follow the recipe and you follow the recipe, odds are we're going to both end up with a fairly decent cake that tastes about the same. Great example in your context is the enrollment, right? Enrollment of folks in access to healthcare. It's a concrete, simple thing. You know, whoever you are, it doesn't change. You have to do steps A, B, and C, and then you're done, right? There's a simple problem. There's a second kind of problem. Let me go back. Complicated. So complicated problem is a problem that, again, the parts are fairly predictable. They don't shift and change, but there's a lot of different things that you got to line up first. So a good example would be sending a rocket to the moon. So there's a heating system, there's a propulsion system, there's a steering system. Like, there's all these complex systems or complicated systems that you're gonna organize. But once you put them in place, they don't tend to deviate too much, and the environment in which they have to work is pretty constant. So you need experts maybe to help you get started. And you probably need to adapt and refine your process over time, but basically it's pretty predictable. And then there's the complex. How many of you have children? Okay, I've got 3 children, gotta tell you. Our first was a daughter who was very quiet and loved to read, and we were brilliant parents, obviously. So we then went out and decided, oh, we can do this, and we had our second, who happened to be this incredibly boisterous, incredibly beautiful son, who was nothing like his sister, by the way. And so suddenly all our confidence in our ability as parents went out the window, right? Same parents, jeepers creepers, but how we needed to parent this boy was completely different from how we had to parent his sister. And it took us time to figure all of that out. So one of the characteristics of a complex problem, and many of you working in issues of child and women's health, you know this, right? Context is everything. The relationships between things are shifting and changing all the time. You know, how many new moms do you see, and their realities are so very different from each other. So how do you find one program, one solution that's actually going to work for all of that context? So collective impact is best suited for these complex kinds of problems. And that's why, given the nature of the complex issues that you're working on at the community level, collective impact makes a lot of sense as a framework. So given this, what do we know about working with complex systems? A community is a complex system. It's always changing. People coming in, people going out. One of the things we know is that really you got to pay attention to where the energy or the action is in a community, right? And go there. That's where you start, right? And it's not always going to look the same. That relationships between and amongst people and players are as important as the work and projects themselves. And I love this. Believe it or not, on the other side of chaos, it's simple rules that help you navigate the course. So let me give you an example. You see the birds there? Birds, not quite as smart as us, we think, right? How come a flock of birds never flies into a window? How do they know? How do they learn to fly together in those intricate patterns without figuring it all out and having a 12-point action plan to guide their decision making, right? The way they do it is they've got 3 simple rules. Fly at the same speed as the birds beside you. Keep a minimum amount of distance between each of the birds beside you, and always fly towards the center. Let me give you a human example. So there was this international hotel chain, and they decided that customer service was their #1 priority. Imagine your job was to design the program to ensure that all of these hotels in all of these different countries with all of these diverse staff could get you to that goal. Can you see what the manual would have looked like, right? So the management was pretty clear that that wasn't going to get them where they needed to get to. They needed something different. And so what they did was they sat there for a while and they figured out, okay, 3 rules. We got it. Here's our 3 simple rules. Whoever you are in our organization, if you are employed by this hotel, you need to know that customer service is #1. Got it? Okay, good. Rule #2, anyone comes to you in the hotel and they say what we need is a high-quality customer experience. If someone asks you, if a client comes to you and asks you, it doesn't matter who you are, what your role is, your job is to fix that problem for them. Find them the answer. You know who you have to talk to, they don't. You own that problem. And thirdly, you're the one who has to bring forward the answer to them. Boom. So you can't write a rule book for every eventuality, but what you can do is you can give some principles and practices to help people use good thinking to be coherent in their response and guarantee high quality. I offer you this because what this indicates is when you are working in a complex, dynamic environment, like a community, you need to know that the leadership and the management practices that you need to embrace need to look different than when it's a problem that you can predict and that you know in advance. So, rather than silos, because you're trying to get different perspectives on the issue, you need to cross boundaries and you need to engage multiple stakeholders. There isn't necessarily, it was Sharon who talked about scope creep, I think, Part of the reason for that often is we're not always sure when we're trying to enhance the health of children and women, where's the best entry point, right? How best do we draw a boundary around what's our work and what's someone else's? It's not always clear. So that's why it's useful to have a framework that you're all kind of putting up there and agreeing to and then being willing to adapt. So now let's go into collective impact. I'm just going to do a bit of a time check. Where am I? So here are the 5 conditions. We've talked about them. You've had them read to you. Let me just unpack and highlight a couple of things. In terms of the common agenda, yes, it is an agreement across multiple stakeholders from different sectors around what's the issue we want, the problem or the issue we're trying to address or the opportunity. But I think as importantly, there are 2 other dimensions, and that is we have a shared understanding of what we think is behind that problem and have agreed upon a common approach for how we want to solve it, okay? Shared measurement, you know, the importance, the rigor of monitoring how we're doing over time is critical, because the reality is, because each community is different, each context is different, we're just trying things. We have to experiment, and then we have to be able to adapt and shift and change, because as we experiment with different things, we'll learn more about the nature of our community. And so that is why that monitoring becomes particularly important. Mutually reinforcing activities, I love this too. So it really is about taking that time to not only map the needs assessment pieces that we were talking about earlier, but you know, as well as the strengths and assets, but what are the different programs and services along a continuum of care that a particular client or client group might be able to access? Where are we seeing that there might be a lot of overlap or duplication, but also where are we seeing gaps that nobody's tending to? And really being intentional about how we, as a group of service providers in a community, align our services so that they are client-centered. Continuous communication. So, absolutely, this is about recognizing that you need to be communicating now, not just with the people that you're working with and accountable to in your job, but you're also working and communicating with your collaborative partners. And that means taking the time to build a shared language with each other. Because though you are of the same community, you are of different sectors and you bring different language and different frameworks. So it's about slowing that conversation down, right, sometimes? I'll tell you, I just led a local workshop all focused on local food production. And here was my big aha. We all live in the same community. We all speak English pretty much as our first language. We're unfortunately not particularly diverse where I live. And we're all talking about local food. My colleague, I'm saying to me, local food is anything within 100 miles. My colleague, who is the VP of food production, of bread production for a national chain, for him, local food was anywhere in Canada. I'm going, oh really? I thought we were talking about the same thing. Right? So it is that piece. And thirdly, I think it's, so you're communicating now with new partners, you're communicating within your organization, and then also you are communicating out to that community that you are working with, because they are your partners alongside you. So lastly, backbone support. So what this is saying is we are learning to work together across sectors in different ways, and this is an acknowledgement that that doesn't happen by accident, and that there is a degree of coordination that these kinds of efforts absolutely need if they're going to get some traction and get results. 3 preconditions. Interestingly, these were named in the very first collective impact article, but not a ton has been done around them. Influential champions, urgency of the issue, adequate resources. Let me just talk about that for a little bit. For influential champions, these are the people within your community who are passionate and care about what you do, and who would be willing to roll up their sleeves, use their influence, and use their relationship networks to help you get stuff done. Urgency of issue, really important. This is your work. You care about it deeply. Not everyone in your community might. And so part of the work is really getting an honest look at how is your issue perceived on that whole continuum of things that people could spend their time on. And if it isn't where you want it to be, how can you use some of the data you have or some of the stories that you have to help heighten that awareness in your community about it, right? And adequate resources, just want to say, absolutely it is about dollars, and it isn't just about dollars either. right? If there are part of the collaboration, often will reveal that there are other agency resources that can be tapped. There are community knowledge, community buildings that can be used. Just paying attention to making sure you harness all of those things. These 5 questions were originally created by the White House Council for Community Solutions when they undertook the work around opportunity youth. We find these very useful, these 5 questions, because they're a bit of a litmus test, right? You can use these, for example, with potential community partners to be really upfront about this is what this kind of work requires. Are we really, really committed to seeing a significant measurable change on an issue we care about? Do we believe that that this isn't going to be a quick fix and that we're in here for the long haul? You know, all of these. In our experience, if you're working with a group and they are saying no to at least 2 of these, 3 of these, you've got some homework to do, I think, before you can embrace a full collective impact approach. It's also a really good litmus test for yourself as your collective impact effort unfolds. Are we paying attention to these things? Where is it that we might, if we're feeling stuck, where might we put more energy and effort, right? So, lastly, before I kind of wrap up the big overview, I think the other piece I really want to emphasize is that this is fundamentally about being willing to work in a different way and working together differently with other sectors at the core. And what that means implicitly is that you individually and your organizations as well have to be open as well. That the way you think things have to be might shift and change. And that's probably a good thing. Okay? So so it is about how you work as much as it is the work that you are doing. And here are some really important mindset shifts to keep in mind as you go about this work. Firstly, you really want to shift from buy-in to ownership. So what does that really mean? Okay? What that means, buy-in, is when I've already figured out what the problem is, I've already figured out how we're going to fix it, and I've already figured out what you and you and you have to do. And now I'm coming to town and I'm going to tell you what you have to do and why. And I'm going to convince you that I'm right. Okay? That's buy-in. Ownership is really starting with the listening piece, right? It's saying to the community in the needs assessment work, what are the strengths that we have? What's unique about this community? Where do we want to start? Where do you want to start? What matters to you within this huge continuum of possibilities around Healthy Start? And then let's start there. So ownership, when you find yourself selling an idea, you're moving into the territory of buy-in. And ultimately, you won't get the kind of traction and momentum you need on a tough, complex issue if you don't shift to ownership. And it takes more time. So, another critical shift is shifting our thinking from thinking about only programs to now thinking about systems. So what does that mean? Does that mean that programs don't matter? No, it doesn't mean that at all. In fact, having good, strong, evidence-based programs are essential to collective impact, but they're not sufficient to get us to the kind of system-level change that ultimately we're embracing because we're saying that the same old way of doing things isn't working. We need to do more, and we need to be different. And frankly, program strategies will never fix system issues. You need system strategies in combination with strong programs to really affect change over time. So it's being aware of that. So part of this work as well is recognizing that we do need to shift from content expertise being number one, and by and large, typically, often the only thing we pay attention to also acknowledging the importance of context. Because rural Atlanta, rural Georgia, and the solution that would work there is completely different to the solution that is going to work in downtown Boston, right? Same core principles, same intention, the way it rolls out is going to look completely different, even one neighborhood to another. And given that, the context and the relationships are so critical to the success of this work on the ground, we need to make room at our table that the content expertise gives us only half of the puzzle. And the context experts, those are your citizens. Those are your people in the communities. How are you engaging the people in your communities? And part of that, implicit in that, is we, as content experts, right, in early childhood and maternal health, we also have to let go a little bit and acknowledge that there's wisdom in the community and invite that community wisdom in. And it isn't just service provider agencies either, right? We have to embrace. Give you a quick story, I don't know if I have time. My colleague, who was doing a lot of work in a huge urban center on poverty reduction, they absolutely knew that they needed to have context experts, people with lived experience of poverty sitting at the table. Not only because they brought that urgency and importance every day to every meeting and kept everybody accountable to solving the big picture problem, but the challenge was they could never get people to stay, right? The big revelation was, you know what, if you're one person living in poverty, poverty is so diverse. How dare you speak on behalf of every person in your community living with poverty? Because frankly, if you're an elderly person living alone in poverty, your reality is completely different from a single mom with 3 kids. So what they learned was that they actually had to create networking groups where the people with lived experience of poverty just hung out with each other and told stories. And over time, that built them a collective knowledge of what the experience of poverty was. So then, when the individual with the lived experience was sitting at the board table along with everyone else, they were speaking on behalf of their constituency, their organization. And they could tell a myriad of stories to contextualize poverty. So part of it is around how we involve these people and being really creative about that. And finally, it's about shifting our thinking from thinking only in terms of positional leaders to thinking about shared and adaptive leadership. So we love the hero leader notion. This is about letting go of that and recognizing that we all have leadership pieces to play. And this is an opportunity through collective impact to invite that different leadership to the table to work together. So when you're dealing, just to summarize, right? When you're dealing with a complex issue, you have to learn and act at the same time. It isn't about planning, then acting, then evaluating, then adapting. It's about safe fail experiments. We try something, and everything we try teaches us more about the environment within which we are working, and how do we take that and then build upon that. And it's about aiming not for consistency only in terms of have we followed the best practice and have we done all of these things, but it's how are we being coherent with the principles and intentions of this work, because we know that that's what the evidence tells us. So there you go. There's my quick roadmap. I know we have time for questions after, so I will pause that and just leave you with lots more to learn. A lot of it's free, so please come and learn alongside us and share what you're learning as you embark on this amazing adventure. Thank you.
Now we will hear from Larita Kegler-Krall's reflections on collective impact.
Thank you, Sylvia. That was a wonderful introduction to collective impact. I'm here to talk about my experience as someone recently introduced to collective impact and how I have been digesting it and really thinking about how it can be applied to the work that we do in Boston with community. As you know, this year the Healthy Start program structure has evolved to incorporate focus on utilizing collective impact for community action networks, and also has evolved to incorporate the support of the John Snow Institute and the Healthy Start Epic Center. So in October, I was invited by the Epic Center team to attend the Collective Impact National Training hosted by the Tamarack Institute in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And so this training was wonderful. It was a great opportunity and a really refreshing way for me to think about reframing the work that we do in community in Boston and how the collective impact approach could provide a more dynamic method by which to achieve systemic transformation within the community. And so to quote the Essential Mind Shifts article that Sylvia referenced by Kania, Hanleybrown, and Jester, to be effective, collective impact must consider who is engaged, how they work together, and how progress happens. Collective impact is the commitment of a group of important actors from different sectors to a common agenda for solving a specific social issue. In the case of Healthy Start, our collective impact efforts will ultimately address improved infant mortality rates for the communities that we serve. But within that larger context and overarching goal, collective impact will also provide unforeseen opportunities to address additional determinants of poor health outcomes for the target populations that we serve. So the added value of the collective impact approach is that in its flexible and reflective structure, it requires that the contextual challenges associated with improving infant mortality rates be explored within a group of multifaceted problem solvers. So again, I'd like to prioritize what really struck me as really being the foundation for collective impact, and something that was referred to over and over again during the training, that it's very important to embrace 3 essential mind shifts. It's important to understand that you need to get all of the right eyes on the problem. One of the funniest things I heard at the training was, if you are not at the table, you're being served. You are on the menu. So the relational is as important as the rational. Again, to your point about relationships and understanding context, that really is where the rubber hits the road with collective impact. And paying attention to the adaptive work, especially within leadership, that it's not just about the technical solutions and the content expertise. So as I thought about my own work in Boston, and I thought about how collective impact should and can be applied, I realized how important it is to accept that there is no such thing as a silver bullet. There is no perfect strategy to achieve the perfect solution. My organization alone doesn't know all the answers, and even if we did know all of the answers, we couldn't achieve them alone. Collective impact lets the solutions and the strategies emerge in a manner that is not only achievable, but it's certainly more sustainable. Collective impact allows for spontaneity as well as the reflection that's required to allow value to emerge, as opposed to attempting to define the expected value or outcome in advance. And to Sylvia's point again, community engagement is an essential cornerstone for success. The collaborative group must embrace a continuous process of listening, understanding, hearing, and acting on a common agenda to achieve shared goals and aspirations. What I found that was really unexpected and really intriguing about collective impact is that the required paradigm shift regarding the function of leadership. Within CI, it is essential to apply a value-driven approach to system change. Collective impact requires that we work differently. It requires that we have cross-sector alignment in which various partners trust each other enough to share lessons learned and proactively use data to improve decision-making. In collective impact, leadership is shared between content and context experts. You will hear that constantly as you learn about collective impact. And it's adaptive, based on the specific leadership need and which partner emerges is able to address that need. Collective impact embraces a fearless approach to failure and a willingness to act and learn simultaneously while constantly assessing the impact of decisions on individuals, organizations, and the larger community. Ultimately, the results of this shared collaborative process should never be attributed to a single entity. The success or failure of the collaborative is shared and ideally will result in systemic transformation and a culture of continuous improvement. So I think it's important, in closing, this is the quick and clean on collective impact. Sylvia provided the foundational information, but this is really about what I learned as a person on the outside, being introduced to something new. I think it's important to acknowledge that as public health, human and social service professionals, we are accustomed to working in diverse, community-wide, cross-sector collaborative groups in order to improve health outcomes for specific populations in need. We have experience in cultivating partnerships. We have contributed to and often led strategic planning processes. We have devoted countless hours to crafting logic models and assessing evaluation results, and indeed we have accomplished much for the communities that we serve. We all in this room have successful records for achieving measurable change and results within our work. So what is really different or new about collective impact? And I'll be honest with you, when I was introduced to collective impact, I thought, this is nothing new. This is something we have been doing in community forever. So why is this special, and why is this the flavor of the week? So collective impact is not offering anything new. It's not about novelty. Instead, it hones in on the common and predictable leverage points for collaborative groups and provides proactive problem-solving strategies that add value to the work of the collaborative group. Collective impact will allow your community action network to break from established processes, orthodoxy, and paradigms, and explore process-oriented risk-taking that is driven by demonstrated community need and an approach to emphasizing contextual knowledge. So for me, the real aha moment came when I realized that collective impact is about understanding how to partner effectively and how to let go of control as leaders. I think the biggest paradigm shift is really about the difference between ownership and buy-in. And to Sylvia's points, understanding how to be adaptive and respond to what actually occurs instead of sticking steadfast to the plan that you submitted within your proposal and saying, you know, we're going to achieve the results that we need eventually. What is more important right now is that this process is shared with the people who will be most affected and impacted by the change that we're trying to create. So understanding how to make leadership adaptive, understanding how to share ownership and share results, and focusing on the difference between ownership and buy-in is really a good way to prepare to properly apply collective impact. And I don't know the answers. I'm just starting this also. But I think that we can trust this process and know that whatever uncertainty that we have to embrace with this paradigm shift will be worth it in the end because it will strengthen our relationships with community. So with that, I thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Partnering for Collective Impact Plenary from the 2014 Maternal and Child Health Bureau Healthy Start Convention. For access to the slides and more information on this topic, please visit www.healthystartepic.org.